Theodore Roosevelt was America's 26th president and magnified his powers not only domestically, though foreignly as well. Roosevelt was in the chair for 8 glorious years between 1901 and 1999. During his time, he accomplished many things and played a significant role in others. Roosevelt was a major contributor in the Great White Fleet, the Russo-Japanese War, and the Antarctic Gold Strike, all which to be addressed throughout this presentation. Roosevelt believed that a large and powerful navy was an essential component of the national defense because it served as a strong deterrent to America's enemies. During his presidency, he built the U.S. Navy into one of the largest in the world by convincing Congress to add battleships to the fleet and increasing its number of enlisted men. In 1907, he proposed sending the fleet out on a world tour. His reasons were many: to show off the Great White Fleet and impress other countries around the world with the U.S. naval power, to allow the Navy to gain the experience of worldwide travel, and to drum up domestic support for his naval program. In December 1907, a fleet of 16 battleships left Hampton Roads, Virginia, and traveled around the world, returning home 14 months later in February 1909, 1 month before his time as president would end. Theodore Roosevelt was among his era's most influential naval strategists, who thought about the overall planning for the U.S. Navy, its use of the military and diplomatic force, and the movement and disposition of the Navy's assets. Roosevelt's legacy as a naval strategist is linked closely to the rise of the U.S. as a great power. More than any individual, he was responsible for the creation of the modern blue-water U.S. Navy and its diplomats to promote an ambitious foreign policy in the Caribbean, Asia, and ultimately in Europe. Hence, all the work of one man to completely reshape the U.S. Navy shows how impactful of a leader he strived to be. Furthermore, not only were the people close to him astonished by what he had accomplished, as well as the public in which he served for. The Seattle Times estimated a crowd of 400,000 on May 26, 1908, for a parade through downtown honoring President Theodore Roosevelt's Great White Fleet, 16 battleships that were on tour. It was this newspaper's panic to print on its editorial page the latest estimate for the city's booming population. At the time of the fleet's visit, it was 2,076,462, plus about 125,000 more who reached Seattle by all means possible. Seattle's suburbs were abandoned, the Times reported, full up. The greatest northern railroads left 250 standing on the platform in Watashi. About 15,000 arrived by railroad in one afternoon, which the newspaper reported with the story headline, "Chaos Regains in King Street Station." In its front-page afternoon summary of the morning parade, the newspaper estimated about 400,000 of those watching the parade and marching in it. That included 6,000 men from the fleet. Roosevelt's next foreign event that really flourished the power behind his name was the Russo-Japanese War. The Japanese asked President Roosevelt to navigate a peace agreement, and representatives of the two nations met in the Portsmouth, New Hampshire, in 1905. For the sake of maintaining the balance of power and equal economic opportunity in the region, Roosevelt preferred that the war ends on terms that left both Russia and Japan a role to play in northern China. Though exited by the Japanese military victories, Roosevelt worried about the consequences to American interests if Japan managed to drive Russia out entirely. When navigations reached an impasse, Roosevelt stepped in with the proposal that Russia buy back the northern part of Sakhalin from Japan control. The Russians were adamant that they would not pay any amount of money which would act as a disguise immediately, when the territory ought to be theirs. After long internal debate, Japan eventually agreed to take only the southern half of the island, without any kind of payment. Theirs had not been a deceived enough victory to force the point. Roosevelt was a natural outgrowth for his expensive and foreign policy. As well, the media portrayed on this event was enormous. All-out war coverage. This front page features 12 stories devoted to the conflict, in the addition to a striking map and a handful of other headlines on the page. Now that's comprehensive coverage. A blurb taken from the SF Chronicles. Lastly, historian Barbara Tuchman wrote, Though the Russian fleet was annihilated, its defeat did not end the war. Japan's victory started the old war and warned the new. 3 months after tsunami in July 1905, the President of the United States offered to mediate between Russia and Japan, less to save the Russians than to halt the Japanese, who seemed to him to have gone far enough. A quote taken from Discreet News, which to me states that the public appreciated how Teddy meditated things opposed to causing more conflict. Thus, Teddy's domestic events that made a major impact on his uprising presidency was the Anthratic gold strike. 140,000 miners in eastern Pennsylvania went on strike in 1902. Coal was a vital energy source for almost all Americans during this era, and the nation panicked during the strike. Represented by John Mitchell, the miners formed the United Miners' Work Union to determine higher wages and better working conditions. George Barr, the owner of the mine, would not concede to the strike's demand. Mitchell approached Roosevelt and asked him to establish an independent arbitration council. Roosevelt, under pressure from Republicans and the American citizens, planned to replace the workers with 10,000 Army men if a settlement could not be reached. Secretary of War Eli Root worked with banker J.P. Morgan, was able to convince the miners to accept independent arbitration. Secretary of War Eli Root declared, "When our president, in his brave and direct way, acting out of his deep feelings for the need of his people, undertook to get coal for them against the coming winter by urging the substantive peace of war in the Anthrac region, Mr. Hill in the New York and Mr. Onley in Boston condemned him. But I have an idea that the people of the country do not agree with them, and I have an idea also that his action will prove in the end to have resulted not merely in getting the coal, but in making a valuable contribution to the peaceful and reasonable process of development I have been describing." Based on the statement from the Tunes by Topic Coal Strike website, it is almost impossible to say Roosevelt was ineffective in dealing with the coal strike. Not only is this evidence conclusive to us, but also to many civilians who praised him after his act of historical significance. From then on, the miners became not merely human mechanics to produce coal, but men and citizens. The strike was evidence of the effectiveness of the trade unions. Roosevelt had said, "I speak for neither the operators nor the miners, but for the general public." He made labor and industries accept the fact that the third party, the great public, had vital intentions and overshadowing rights, and so set a percentage of the federal government to intervene in labor disputes. Not a strike bar, but as a representative of the public interest. The public supported Teddy more after this domestic act, as he fought for them as the third party, and having their own rights. He fought to stop the nation's famine that would occur if the coal strike had continued. He fought for their health and rights as people. Drafted, and the final copy of the opening address in the 1902 conference TRP letter to Roosevelt. In conclusion, it is safe to assume that in his 8 years of presidency, Theodore Roosevelt put the people first. He acted swiftly and calmly to reshape America to the beautiful country it is today. Furthermore, by his effectiveness as a leader and how the media portrayed him after all of his foreign and domestic events, you can conclude that the amplified efforts he put forth will not go unnoticed or unappreciated.